Hi, welcome to Healthy Foundations Family Program. And this video today is to help you to just think about some different things about helping your kids to manage their frustration. And frustration in our kids that are really explosive and often irrational. It looks like they're just angry all the time, and it can be very maddening and frustrating for parents. So I'm gonna go over quite a bit of material today and just talk about managing frustration and in the families and in your family in particular, and how you want to do that. And this is a subject that I'm going to give you some background and kind of overview look at it, but really how you're going to use it, you may need some additional help because it's tough. And for some of your kids, I know some of the ones that we've worked with, and maybe, if you're looking at working with us, like, it's not just anger and frustration that you're concerned about, it's the level and the damage that the kids are doing to your house, to you, to the other kids in the family, maybe even pets, so I want to just give you a lot of things to think about, and also to ask questions about. And so if we were live, I would, allow you to have those questions in those situations. So you may need to write some of those down, give us some more feedback on what you hear and how you think it would work, and how we could tweak it, I guess, to try it. So, but anyway, this is about managing frustration so that your kids aren't taking their anger and frustration out on you, on the other kids in the family, and on their pets. And it's really our goal in talking about this in terms of your family, is that we want you and your kids, we want your kids to learn to get along better with others, and especially in our family units. And in order to get along better with other people, whether we're adults or kids, we have to know how to manage our frustration. Now, our kids are very inflexible and irrational over sometimes really trivial matters, and this causes them to act out with these big reactions to sometimes very small things that we may not have even noticed. Like, we don't even know what happened. And so, when we get frustrated or we act out poorly, we're actually reacting too. But we may be more aware. We may not be acting out on every trivial thing that happens. And so this inflexibility in our kids is because of the way their brain is working. It may be because of what's actually going on inside of their body. There's a lot of reasons for inflexibility. Sometimes it's because of trauma. And what we find in our families is that over time, when you have somebody that you're dealing with that is so irrational and so inflexible, that we kind of become that way too, and how we deal with those people. We start becoming inflexible, and we want to just, lay down the law. And I know a lot of families where it's like there's been a lot of trying, different punishments and, talking and, trying to have consequences, but it's actually the way their brain is working. And so we have to help them through that because, it causes kind of these similar knee-jerk reactions, right? Which anytime there's, kind of explosive behavior, I think that's pretty solid on the other people around, that there's going to be these reactions. So I'm going to talk a lot today about, like, helping our kids and helping us as adults working with kids to, help them to problem solve and to work through these difficulties. And where you are right now in that process, this may seem impossible, but it is what we're working towards. And it's also realizing that the kids are not choosing to act this way. These kids have extreme difficulties in applying a skill that they need the most when they need it the most. So the way we know that is like we can talk to kids. As a therapist, I talk to kids all the time about coping skills and how they're going to use it and what are you going to do when you're angry, right? And yet in those moments when they're frustrated, that's all out the window. And so if you as a parent don't know how to help your child to use some skills and to build those skills, then you're all going to kind of be stuck in this reacting. And so it's not, I don't believe that it's planned or intentional on what the kids are going to do. And most of the kids I work with, remember, I think we've talked about this in other videos, there's now and not now. And so when we're talking to them about coping skills and we're trying to help them, we have to keep in mind that we're talking about that now, but what is happening in the frustration and the anger is not at this time. And so for them to take that skill that we're talking about and then apply it when it's happening, that's where we have to really help. And so I think talking about this really helps us as the adults to know how to help our child through these difficulties. So let me just describe a little bit more the kids that I'm talking about here. And most of you that are listening to me are like, oh yeah, I know that kid, I'm trying to raise that kid. Or you may be working with a kid like that. But these are kids, I call them really edgy. They're just really edgy kids. They're always kind of on the edge. They're very explosive, easily agitated. They're often depressed and anxious kids, and they're very non-compliant. Their first reaction is not to say yes mom or yes dad. It's not to do what you say that you want them to do, or even what they say that they're going to do. And again, I want you to just keep in mind that they are irrational and inflexible over trivial matters, and they're acting out on that. And that a lot of times we're not aware of what's actually going on, and they're not able to tell us what's actually going on. They are not communicating in a way that helps us. Like they're just frustrated, and it's your fault, and that's all they can see at that moment. So these kids tend to be very poor in problem solving. They're very poor in planning. They're very poor in organizing their thoughts and controlling their impulses. And so when we say that their behaviors are not planned or intentional, that's pretty much it when you have kids that are very poor at all of this planning and problem solving. So it's very much in the moment, this knee-jerk reaction of what happens. The ones who we have to put the planning and the organizing and the being that kind of external brain on is on you as the parent, and with the help of other adults, that like, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do. So you have to come at it from that rational side, but it's not going to be rational for the child, even if you have a rational discussion about it at a time when they're not frustrated. And we'll talk about that more. So I also want to point out that most of the kids that I work with, even if in the moment, they're kind of puffed up in their anger and their aggression, and defiant, seemingly defiant and all of that. These kids, they don't like their own behavior. It's not coming from a happy place. No matter how many times we tell them, they are not going to be thinking clearly in those moments, and someone has to help them to get calm. Someone's going to have to help them to figure this out. And so this is another piece of this, because a lot of parents will tell me like, well, they're fine, like they're doing well at school, or they have this ability to think, or to like, I play a lot of games with these kids where we talk about social skills, or we talk about managing frustration, and yes, they know all the right answers, they know what to do, but the problem is when they don't get their own way, or something doesn't go the way that they wanted, or it just turns out differently than how they thought it would, that these children lack the skill. And I really want to focus on that word skill. They lack the skill to know what to do when things don't go their way, what to do when it doesn't happen. And so someone has to help them to think clearly in those moments, and to stay in that clear clearer thinking, rather than waiting till they explode and then being like, well, you just can't handle losing, or you're just mad because somebody else got something you wanted, or, or you're just seeking attention. All these things that we say about the behavior after it happens, rather than recognizing it as it's happening and how we help move them through it. So, these kids are kids that are going to need some little extra help with that. I say little, like it's going to be, just a little bit, but no, they need a lot of help in this area. So, also, these kids have an impulsive negativity. So, no, I don't want to, shut up, leave me alone. All of these kind of pushing away, very, very common with kids with severe ADHD type symptoms. That's executive functioning. That's autism. It's that immediate, like, no. So even though if you've worked with me at all, you know that I want the kids to give a positive response. So when you tell them to do something, I want them to say, yes, mom, or even if you're getting their attention, I want them to say, yes, mom, yes, dad, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, because I want them to acknowledge that. Just know that you may have to wait at least 30 seconds for that to happen. So we're very quick. I have found that we want those answers from the kids right away. And so we don't give them that time to give that response. So remember, their immediate response is going to be no, I don't want to. And that's why they get that oppositional defiance disorder diagnosis. But it's also the way their brain is thinking. So none of these disorders, none of these diagnoses are in order for us to excuse that. It's to give us information to know that we have to work with this. And that immediate impulsive negativity, we need to wait at least 30 seconds and then get that answer before they do something. Because a lot of kids will say no, and then if we wait, they'll be like, stomp off and do it. I want them to still say that yes, yes, mom, or yes, dad, because we're working against that impulsive negativity. Remember, we are building new skills, and building new skills is executive functioning brain training, and that is going to take that building piece of it. It's not excusing it, and it's not punishing it. It's rebuilding, and we got to start somewhere. So, these kids also have very little insight about themselves. So they don't really know or understand that they're coming off as demanding, self-centered, that they're lacking empathy. They don't have social tact a lot of times. And so a lot of times as adults, like, you're worried about that because you can see like that they are being rude, or that they're, puffing themselves up, or bragging, or they think they're all that, right? Or they're not caring about their brother or their sister or how anybody else feels in the situation. This is how they are day to day. Like it's not, it takes, they may have times when they have empathy or that they care about somebody else. That's when they're calm, right? But they don't have a lot of awareness when they are upset, how they're coming across or what they're saying. A lot of times they don't even know they're yelling, and yet you can be talking calmly to them and they think you're yelling at them. So it's the way their brain is processing it, and we have to help them with that. So stay calm and work through that with them, because they don't have that awareness, and you being upset about it or pushing them to try to understand that is not necessarily going to help them to get there. And we do want to get there, right? We want to raise our kids to be functional. We want them to have that empathy so that they can function in their relationships. So, and we also, don't want to have tyrants running around that are demanding and, of everything that they want, and stuff. So that we call that narcissism as they get older, right? And we don't want that. So we do have to train and teach this. Another thing that you need to understand is that these kids have very slow language processing. So even though they may be talking really fast, and a lot of kids that have may have a really good vocabulary and saying a lot of words, and they're really good at arguing, they're not really processing. So they're slower in processing what they're being told, and they're slower and actually even really understanding what they're saying. So they're not talking, like when they're arguing with you, that's why they can flip-flop from one thing to the next. Like there's no point that they're going to. Like when you stop, when they're able to stop and you say, what do you want? They'll be really angry and agitated and say, I don't know, right? Because they don't really know. Like they don't know where they're going with it, you know. So there's some things going on with their language processing that we just need to know. And in that frustration, there's this frustration of like, I don't know what to do, but they don't know how to get the help that they need. So in frustration, instead of just frustration, we need to teach our kids to be able to say, I don't know what to do, or I need help, or this is what's bothering me, or I don't like this. This is hard for me. And the way that your kids are saying that is in all the other language and the things they're yelling at you and the ways that they're pushing away. And so they're not getting their need met because they're not totally aware of what they need, but they don't have better words. We have to help them find better words. So some of that is kind of like providing a map for their brain of how they're going to do that. And so, that's kind of what we have to work on. Now, once they're frustrated and they've like reached that threshold where now they've lost it, even if it didn't take very long to get there, then we're not going to be able to rationalize with them because they're irrational. So then it becomes about creating safety, and we're going to talk about that as well. Keeping your child coherent and in that problem solving, so piece where we keep them lower so that they are a little bit more rational. Again, they may not be totally rational, or they're going to still have these same problems, is really our goal. Like part of why we do some of the things that we do, like staying closer to your child, being more aware of where they are on the mountain of escalation, and whether how close they really are to flipping their lid, and really knowing what happened before is super important in helping them to work through these behaviors. So what happens a lot of times is that at the part where we intervene, that's where we see the problem. So let's say your child grabs a cookie off the counter, and you tell them, no, you cannot have this cookie, or put it back, or stop, or whatever it is, right? Or they, and then they lose it, right? They shove it in their mouth, they yell at you, they throw the cookie at you, or they hit and kick you when you're trying to stop them from doing that thing. But if we can go back to the moment, like they're reacting off of the no, or you can't, or you must. And so we kind of have to go back to like, what is it that's driving that behavior with the cookie? And so, well, that's not a perfect example. Like that's just kind of an example of how, like, now we're dealing with, they hit me, they kicked me. And so now we're, dealing with that. But really, if we go back, it's like, what was it about the cookie? Like, is there a way we could have handled that in a different way? So, this approach to it is not just ignoring it. I'm not saying, just ignore that they hit and kicked you, or that they ate the cookie. It's a very active approach, and it's not passive, because we're going to need you to be kind of in this mode of dealing with this and understanding that these kids, they're very, they have this demand, right? For whatever it is they want right now, because they're irrational and they're impulsive. And so, that just takes some real understanding of where they're coming from, and it means that our ability to intervene in a positive way, in a direct way, it has to happen sooner, which can only happen if we're right there, because otherwise we're going to always be dealing with things after they happened. So again, these are some things that you may already know from listening to the videos or from doing the family program. Structure is super important for your kids. So structure with lots of positive attention, and then fewer and clearer commands. And especially I want you to keep that in mind as we talk a little bit. It's going to sound like I'm telling you to negotiate with your child, but I want you to also remember that my number one rule in communicating with your child is fewer and clear commands. So it's not lecturing and it's not talking. But it is going to be open up some doors here, that we expect compliance quickly, but it may not be as quick as you want, right? Remember that 30 seconds that we need to give them to get their brain around it. But that's what we're working towards, is that we're going to be clear and concise, and that we want them to follow up with that action. And they need that. If they don't, they get lost. So, and then immediate intervention, positive or negative, needs to happen. So as we're moving through those things, so you have the structure, clear and few commands, compliance expected right away, and then immediate intervention. And then I want to help you to not back down in these tantrums. So all of this immediate intervention in positive and negative ways is really about motivation and learning. We want to keep our kids motivated. We want to keep learning. And I think that has to do with expecting that compliance right away. If we stop, like I tell my child to do something, or you tell your child to do something, and then they don't do it, and then we start explaining why they need to do it or why we need them to do it right now. Well, you need to get your shoes because we got to go, and you don't want to make me late, and all of this. Then we lose our kids, and we lose that immediate intervention. So it's like we go, we get the yes mom, yes dad, and we start moving. Let's go. Here we go. And it really does help. So also, it's in that moment, right? It's not going to happen later. We're not going to correct this behavior later. So that's another part of that intervention, is that things have to happen right now. We can't deal with it after the fact. So if they had the meltdown, if we didn't catch it and they had the meltdown and all these things happen, like we're not going to necessarily correct it. There may be some things we do to resolve some things, but the lecturing and the like, didn't you see this? And, wanting them to feel bad, which they may or may not, isn't going to help them. We got to help them move through things as it's happening. And then afterwards, we have to move through to resolving things so that they kind of learn this pattern too. So one thing I like parents to keep in mind is, if this, then this, so if this happens, then this is going to happen. And I need you to really think about that in terms of what you're going to do as well. If this happens, because remember, a lot of kids' behavior is very circular. It happens, it's the same thing that always happens. Every time they have a meltdown, this happens. Every time it's this time of day, or this, I tell them to do this thing, then this is what happens. So we're intervening at that point before it happens. So you have to know in your mind what you're going to do. If this happens, this happens. And a lot of people use this in a consequence kind of way. It's like, if you slam your door, I'm going to take the door off your bedroom. And that's okay, right? Like, I think that's a good result to happen, but just understand that it's not going to correct the behavior, right? What they're going to do when they're frustrated. They're going to find something else to slam. But it's still okay for you to know what you're going to do, and for your child to know that when this happens, that these kind of things happen. It's just not going to work to hold it over them as punishment. So when you go back later and you say, didn't you learn anything? Like, I already took your door off. What else do I need to take away? Didn't you learn anything from that? It's like, the answer to that is no. Like, they didn't hold it in their head. They don't have that ability to hold it, because remember, there's now and not now. So even when you take the door off, it's usually after there's already been a problem. And like I said, well, I'm not in disagreement that that's what needs to happen for safety reasons. That's fine. It's just that is not going to teach. They're not going to learn the lesson at that time. And so there's still some things that we have to learn. So, here's another way to think about it. And I think this picture might help you in a lot of different situations with your kid. If somebody is drowning, like let's say your kid, let's not make it your kid, because that's like a little bit scary. You might I don't want to think about my kid drowning. But if you're a lifeguard and somebody's drowning, you have to have an immediate action to that. You can't hold up, money and tell them, come on, just swim to me, and then I'll give you this money, right? Like that's what we do sometimes with behavior. It's like the behavior shows that our kid is drowning, and yet we try to motivate them by saying, if you do this, then I'll do this, right? And the other thing that we try to do is like, if you drown, then I'm going to be really mad at you, right? Like if you drown, I'm not going to do this, or and so if you think about a person in their poor behaviors as drowning, then we have to interact and to help them at that moment. It may not be the best time to teach them to swim, right? We have to rescue them. We have to help them through that. And so our kids are kind of drowning in their emotions and their frustration, and we have to help them to work through that. And it's going to take some practice, and there's going to take some time, and they're not going to be perfect at it. And so it's in those moments when they're not frustrated and they're not drowning that we also have to know what we're teaching and how we're teaching it. So flexibility and dealing with frustration are really critical skills. Flexibility and dealing with frustration are critical life skills, and we cannot force those. So I want you to really think about yourself, and if you're a model, are you a model in flexibility, in training, and are you able to model how to deal with frustration? What do you do when you're frustrated? What's okay to do in your family when someone's frustrated? How do we work through frustrations? We got to teach our kids this, and we teach them both ways. We're gonna teach them before they're frustrated. We're gonna give them some ideas and some problem solving, and we're gonna work on this. But at the same time, we're going to help them through it when they're frustrated. When they're frustrated. So remember that the problem is not motivational. It's not like dangling the money. Like if you calm down, I'm going to give you this, or we can't go to do this, if you're not going to be calm. It's helping them, like, I can see you're frustrated. Here's what we're going to do about it. So our response, it has to be different than what it's been. And we need our kids to be able to stay coherent in their frustration. So what happens is kids that flip their lids, that go over the mountain of escalation, that escalate, from 0 to 60, that go out of their minds, that have these extreme meltdowns, they're not staying coherent. They get frustrated, and some kids, it is like hair trigger, right? They make a mistake. I have one kid that I work with, that if something gets dropped on the floor, even if he drops it, if he makes a mistake, if he drops some food, he's just like immediately frustrated. He is learning that he can clean it up. He's learning that he can deal with it, right? And sometimes him dealing with it gets in the way of what we were working on. And so we have to be really careful that we are kind of on the same wavelength, because we're also, sometimes the things they get frustrated about that trigger them, we're not totally aware of. So this is where it's like really watching and being close and understanding, what we're helping them through. We're going to respond before they're at their worst. That's our goal. And we're not going to be an adversary, right? We're going to see it as an early warning sign or an early sign, and we're going to move towards them to help. So it's not a warning. It's not something they're doing to us, right? When they start to get frustrated, a lot of kids will get in trouble. It's like, well, I can't help you if you're just going to get frustrated. It's like, no. Like, they're already frustrated. Like, how are we going to help them to work through it? Now, I know that the higher the frustration level is, the less they are going to be available mentally and emotionally for you to help. So this is where we have to come in with some really good intervention. Remember, again, I'm going to keep talking about this, that the more frustrated they are, the less flexible they're going to be. And they're already inflexible kids. Like, they're very rigid, right? And so that inflexibility that they have, and then us being inflexible, it's like, I told you not to act that way. Or they get frustrated because something spilled and then they knock something else over. In that moment, if you meet that with that inflexibility or that irritation, that's going to equal a meltdown. So how you respond to that is going to really matter, and that's going to take some practice on your part. So really think about how flexible you are now when you're frustrated, right? Because your kids do something that's frustrating, like spill their milk or rip their paper because they got mad because they made a mistake on it, and now you're frustrated, and how that happens, where we're both frustrated, right? Because we've told them a million times, like, it's okay to make a mistake, or it's, like, you don't have to make it worse, right? And so, we got to really watch how we meet that, because it's going to blow up. Remember, we're trying to diffuse it. We're noticing that they're frustrated. We're going to try to keep them coherent through it, which is going to be tricky, because they may swear, they may cuss you out, they may, think that it's your fault. All of those things that cause us to then meet them with that frustration, right? Like, it's not my fault that you spilled your milk. Why are you yelling at me, right? But if we meet that frustration with frustration, it's going to explode. So it's coming around it, understanding that they're frustrated, and even though they don't have the words, right? They're not communicating with the words that we want. That we're going to help them through that, because that's not a trainable moment to teach them the right words, but we're going to help them through it so that we can learn a better way to deal with it. Your child cannot handle these little things that happen. Remember, these trivial things that happen, they are showing you they cannot handle it. So they may be saying things, like, I want you to be aware of the family dynamic, right? When this happens, one person gets frustrated, the next person gets frustrated, and just kind of be aware of that dynamic. Remembering that they're saying things like, I hate you, or screw you, or worse. But maybe it really means I'm tired, I'm hungry, I can't. When they're saying I won't, or I'm not going to, or no, what are they saying? Are they communicating frustration? Do we want to help at that level before it reaches the place where now they're going to do everything they can and acting out to communicate how frustrated they are? So we got to help them think. These are not fast shifters. They don't shift from one thing to the other. If they're locked in on something they're frustrated with, even if it's something that's making them really mad, they won't just give it up. I mean, I've sat with kids lots of times trying to help them with homework, things like that. They're getting frustrated. Their tunnel vision, their ability to listen, they will tell you that you don't know what you're talking about. If you're trying to help them to erase something and they're frustrated, it's hard for them to shift and to allow for that help. So, you're going to have some empathy and help them where they are in that moment. So again, we want to look for those factors before the difficulty arrives. If we know that they always are frustrated with math homework and it always happens like this, then we got to figure out how we're going to approach it. Because if we are saying, like, I've told you this 100 times, or this happens every time when you try to do division, then you've got to come around it a little bit differently. So you've got to work on that problem solving, and not expect them to do it in that meltdown. So it's like starting beforehand, like, hey, we've got a little bit of math to do, and I know math makes you really frustrated, so we're going to try to do it a little differently today. When I see you get frustrated, we're going to just pause for a minute and think, and then try it. I'm not going to tell you too much, and I'm not going to expect you to ask for help. I'm just going to notice when you need help. So it may be, if you have this ongoing thing, you have to be right there to help. And it doesn't mean pointing out everything that they're doing wrong, or because that's going to increase the frustration. So with some kids, you kind of need them to let them go, do the work, and then kind of assess whether they can handle that correction at that moment or not. So, and if you're the right one to do the correction. So, sometimes it's not always the parent's place or the best avenue to be the one to make that correction on something, or in that moment. Remember that if you use no, you must, or you can't, those are fighting words, and those are gonna be, we reserve that for like a safety issue. Then it's a no, then it's a must, and then it's a can't. But if it's the cookies, and we used a no, a must, or can't, then we might have escalated it to a safety issue. And I think that's an important thing to realize, is that sometimes, even when we're not trying to, we move it to a safety issue because of how we came at it. So one response to a problem is no, you must, you can't. Another response to a problem is to ignore it and not do anything and just let it go. And sometimes we have to do that. But today I really want to talk to you a little bit more about this, another option, which is to work it out. And we want to teach our kids to work it out. We want them to work out their frustration. We want them to be able to work through hard things, because remember, we want to use strategies that make things possible, right? We want to open some doors for these kids when they're drowning. We're not just ignoring that. We want to help them through it. We want them to see that there's a lifesaver that they can grab onto, and right now they can't see it because they're drowning. So even if you hit them over the head with it, they don't see it. So we're going to start on the working it out piece of it. And again, I want to remind you that even though it's in the working it out, it for you as a parent, it's going, if you're not careful, it's going to lead back to lecturing, I told you so, or I've told you 1,000 times type of stuff. Okay, so it's also not just a bunch of questions for the kids. Remember, when they're stressed, the questions are really, really tough. So it's helping you to start there. Unless safety and hitting is an issue, we're going to look at what started and what we could have done. So when the child grabs the cookie, and then when it ends in hitting and kicking, if we really want to resolve that issue in our own minds so we know what to do better next time, we can't just look at the hitting and kicking. We have to look at the fact of what happened when they grabbed the cookie, what was going on. I see a lot of kids grab something like that even when they're starting to get frustrated, so when we come at it with our frustration of like, I told you no cookie, and then it escalates. So, but at the same time, it's not just letting them have the cookie, it's we're going to start here kind of thing. So let's, with that example of the cookie, which may or may not be the best example, I want you to think about some other words, like identifying, like, hey, are you hungry? Is that what you're saying? That you're hungry? You want a snack? We're going to have dinner in 10 minutes. Can we put this cookie and eat it after dinner? Are you able to wait 10 minutes? So it's intervening in a way that gives them a different path to choose. It's not asking them too much, but because if you just ask them, like, why did you take the cookie? They're not going to be able to give you an answer. Okay? I don't know. Too late now. I put it down my mouth, So you're going to acknowledge what you think is happening at that time. Are you frustrated? Sometimes is a good question, but sometimes it's better to just say, I can see you're hungry, but I will have dinner ready in 10 minutes. Or if it's an hour and a half or 2 hours until the next meal, you might be able to negotiate on something else. You might be able to say, are you still hungry? Like, I know we just had snack, but if you're still hungry, let's have some whatever else it is that you would rather have them have. Or if it's like they just grabbed it and what you're mad about is that they grabbed it without asking, then you can still identify that they grabbed and say, you know, you look like you're still hungry. Yeah, I'm okay if you have the cookie. And then you can say, I wish that you would have just told me, right? So it's like you gotta remember what your goal is and what you're working on if you don't want it to escalate to just being hit or the cookie thrown or whatever else happens. So remember you have that place of like saying no, but that might also move it into more of a safety issue. But our goal is to work it out. We want to identify for them what they might be feeling, because we want eventually for them to be able to say it, and we're giving them kind of that brain mapping of how to help them. It's not really brain mapping, it's more like a roadmap. So we're giving them a mental script to provide a way to think more clearly. So, you know, if this is where, like, when you have those calmer times with your kid, when they're not upset, when you're doing something that they like side by side that they enjoy, or whatever, you're not having a conflict, you can have those conversations about, hey, when you get frustrated, what can we do? What can we do when you get frustrated? And really listen to what they have to say. If they start to get really frustrated while you're talking about it, which some kids do, then you might have to bring them back down. Like, hey, I just want to help you. Like, if we don't talk about it, I can't help you. You're not in trouble right now, but I just want to be able to talk to you about, like, what should we do with frustration? What do we do in our family with frustration? How do you handle your frustration? Really be careful that you don't just start lecturing about, like, well, when I'm frustrated, I do this, and then you go on and you kind of lose the kid, because they may or may not be listening. And know that even if you have a really good conversation and you come up with some ideas about what you're going to do, what they're going to do when they're frustrated, and how you're going to help them, I notice you're frustrated, I'm going to tell you to take a break. But just know that just because you talked about it doesn't mean the next time they're frustrated that everything's going to be fine, and that they're going to remember to use their tools, or that they're going to know what to do. You're going to say, you're getting frustrated, so we're going to take a break. And so you're going to still direct it. They're going to need help, and they're going to mess up, and you're going to mess up too, because frustration is frustrating. And so it's going to take some practice, but that's what we have in our families, is this ability to practice and to learn. So we're giving them ways to think more clearly, and we're staying calm where normally they would be irrational or explosive. We want them to learn to stay calm. And so you gotta have to address that with your kids. Like, hey, when you get upset, you just explode. And I want to help you, because we got to work through this. We got to find better ways. So what is going to be okay? So you're going to want to identify what they feel. Like, you can say, hey, it looks like you're getting frustrated, or I can tell you're embarrassed. So what here's what we're going to do. And come in with that plan and be directive. We're not ignoring it, but we also want to move past it. So we're not going to stay stuck there. We're not going to make accusations. We're not going to say, like, you always get frustrated. Like, I don't know how to help you because you always get frustrated every time we sit down to do this. Or, also, like, we can get stuck in identifying too much. Like, I know you hate spelling, and so, I hate to do this to you, and I don't want you to have to do spelling, but your teacher wants you to do it. No. We have to do this. It's difficult. Let's get through it as quickly as possible. So you're kind of approaching it that way. You're going to also rehearse with your kids. Like, you're going to give them the scripts. So you're going to tell them, like, man, it would help me a lot if you could just say, I'm frustrated. Or, I can't do this. Or, I don't want to do this. Maybe that means I'm frustrated. If that means I'm frustrated, I'm going to listen for that when you say that. And I'm going to look for maybe the least offensive way that you can tell me you're frustrated, and how I can help without having to ask you. Because when you're frustrated, it doesn't work for me to ask you. So a lot of this is going to take you thinking about your child and how they face, in this whole thing and what you can do. It's not totally ignoring it or redirecting it. It's not trying to talk them out of it. It's identifying it and helping them to move through it. Now, what about safety? And we're going to kind of wrap up with this kind of stuff. So I want you to realize too that with our kids, and just the way our world is and the way that we all kind of interact, there is a demand for rapid processing. And our kids are not good at this. When we say stop, we want them to stop. When we ask a question, we want an answer. So remember that pause and that waiting and not pushing. We don't need to ask 10 times. We don't need to keep rephrasing the question. Just give them a minute to think. When nothing's happening, they will fill in the blanks, because the waiting can be uncomfortable too, but it gives their brain time to think. If kids are telling you no right off the bat, if they're saying I don't know, if they're saying what, that gives their brain time to process, and that's what they're really asking for, is that wait. So if they say what, you don't need to say it again, just wait a second. Don't say I already told you. Don't say what did you hear, just wait at least 30 seconds. Then if you lose them, you can go back to the same thing. Don't reword it. Say whatever you said, very clear and concise, the same thing. Repeat yourself. It's okay. Their brain needs it. You're going to remember that when dealing with frustration, you're going to talk about it when they're not frustrated. At a time when they're not frustrated, you may do it as a family, to say, we have a lot of frustration and anger in this family, and people get upset really easily. I get upset really easily. Let's talk about what we can do in our family when we're frustrated. You're going to give them some positive, well, it may not be that positive, but what's okay to do when you're frustrated. I used to ask kids a lot this when they're in the office. I said, what's okay to do when you're mad? And they would tell me things like, well, I can go to my room, or I can breathe, or I could go for a walk. Some things are not realistic. We don't want our kids just walking out the door. But can they go to their room? Can they ask for a break? If they say, I want to just go to my room when I'm frustrated, then you may have to intervene in that and say, I like that you can go to your room and calm down, but we might need to take a break at the table first, or I might need you to say, I need a break before you go to your room. Remember, we're practicing the ideal, and that we know in the situation that it's not going to be ideal. So it's okay to be mad. It's okay to be angry. What are we going to do about it, and how can I help you, right? Lots of conversation about that, but very clear and concise. If this happens, then this happens, okay? And that's the same thing when it reaches the safety issues. If you don't ask for a break, if you don't communicate, or I miss it and you explode, here's what's going to happen. It may be that you're going to do some safety time. It may be that they're going to be in their room until they calm down and can sit on their bed, and then you're going to, get calm with them. It's not going to be punishment. You explode and then I'm going to ground you for a week or whatever. It's like, good luck with that. But what you're going to do in that moment. So what about when it's really unsafe for other people? What if you cannot get that child to be safe? Then I want you to think about what you can do to create safety. So I want your child to know ahead of time. Like, I have a lot of families that have pets, and for the most part, with your explosive child, your pets know to get out of Dodge, right? They know to get out of the room when that child is angry and upset. But I have some animals that I've seen in some homes that are extremely patient, and they try to calm the person down, and they stay close, right? They stay very close to either the parent or the child. But the first thing that you want to do is create safety for everyone else. So if your child is going after a sibling or an animal, I want you to get them out of the room first. What's already happening with your child is happening. Deal with the immediate first. So I learned this in Taekwondo. I did a lot of training. I'm a 4th degree black belt, and we always deal with the threat first. So if someone has a knife or something like that, you got to deal with that first. And so you want to deal with the immediate threat to the animals or the pets. I think that your child should know that. It's like, if you get upset, I am not going to let you hurt my animals. I will make sure that they leave. So get the animals out of the room, put them outside, put them in their kennel, whatever you need to do. And then work on containment for your child. And that containment, for some kids, with younger kids, some parents are able to safely get a hold of their kids. For other ones, it means getting out of getting them in a place where they're gonna not hurt somebody. Will they hurt their room? Will they be destructive? Yes, especially if you just leave them. But if you stay close by, that helps. But I also need you to be safe. So if staying close by means that you get hurt, you're going to have to create some kind of containment where you don't get hurt also. And we've talked about this explosive and anger before, and that if it's part of your safety plan that you need to call the police or a neighbor or somebody to help, then that's what you need to do, because safety is really important. And if you can't establish safety, and if you don't have a plan for it, and your kid knows that you don't have a plan, then it gives them too much, I call it power, but it's really insecure power. And that's not healthy. So know what the plan is when in the safety crisis. Unsafe behavior and meltdowns mean that there's more work to do with your child. They're not handling their frustration. They're not handling things very well. If they have a meltdown because they lose a game, there's more work to do. It doesn't mean we don't play games. It doesn't mean that they always get to win. We have some work to do, and we need to address it, and we need to work on it on the front end, and we need to work through it as it's happening. So know what you'll do in advance with the situation. And like I said, if you can't remove the child from the situation, then you're going to have to remove others first. And then, a lot of this conversation has been about contributing, looking at what's contributing to those meltdowns. And sometimes it's us and our inflexibility and our saying, no, you must or you can't, at a time when we could have worked through it. And sometimes when you first start working through it with kids, they're gonna escalate because they're used to this other interaction. It's like, wait a minute. I'm here to help you. Like, seriously, like, I really want to help you work through this. I'm not just saying don't, I want to help you. And I've done that quite a lot, and it actually really works. So it just takes a lot of practice on both ends. Your child has some things to learn, and you have some things to learn too. We all do, because frustration and irritability and all of that is hard to deal with. It makes people challenging, whether they're kids or another person. So remember that compliance is a skill that does not come naturally to all children, and that impulsive negativity is there, and it's not just somebody being defiant. It's part of the way their brain is working. But all of these things are skills, and skills have to be taught, and they have to be practiced. And we're not good at it when we don't have those skills, and not all kids naturally have those skills for whatever reasons. So I hope that this has really helped you to want to resolve the things that are happening, and to work to help your kids to work through these things. And if you have questions or thoughts, even if you want to say, like, there's no way that's ever going to work with my kid, that's totally fine. Let's talk about it. And I appreciate your comments. Talk to you later.